Welcome everyone to another episode of the Director's Desk with Bina Hale and my lovely friend and colleague Catherine Bell. So, gosh, we've done quite a few of these. We're really enjoying putting these together, and I hope you're enjoying them as much as we are listening. Just to two experienced professionals that have seen it all, having a chat, finding this a lot cheaper than therapy to do. But today we're going to be discussing something that I am very passionate about, and I need to give my emotions in check here, about the cost of transport in the UK. Catherine, let's go into this.
So, yeah, I mean, this is a very, very pressing issue at this moment in time, and it's affecting the United Kingdom, the cost of transport. And what I think is really important for us to talk about today as well is the disparities between the North and South also.
And I think for me, I get frustrated. If I'm really honest and I go straight in, I get very, very angry most of the time when I try to get on a train. It's either late or it doesn't turn up at all. It's cancelled on a whim.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what time of the year it is. It's snow, it's wind, it's rain. Everything impacts our trains. And being fortunate enough to have travelled quite a lot of the world, I look at what other countries have as an infrastructure, and I find it very hard to believe that I live in one of the most developed countries in the world and our transport system is so archaic. I mean, have you ever tried working off a train? Firstly, if you can find a seat, good luck.
Yeah.
I usually end up in someone's armpit.
Yes.
Great for them and great for me. Or, you try and work, the internet connection is shocking. It is just not acceptable. And on top of all of that, the cost. I mean, for me, as someone that lives in the Midlands, my train journey into London is 35 minutes. The cost of that train journey just into Euston is just under £50. Then the tube is another 10, and then parking is another 10. So I'm looking at £70 a day, and I'm one of the lucky ones, which we'll go into in a bit more detail later. £70 a day just to get into London. And it's getting to a point where I cannot afford to pay that anymore.
No. It's and to be honest, it's only going to get worse. You think about the recent budget announcements.
Yes, how can we forget that?
Well, yeah, and there is, the 4.5% hike, which we will start to see, will come into play in April 2025. So, yeah, I mean, let's look at some of the facts around the current state of transport costs. So according to the Office of National Statistics, the average cost of commuting in the UK has risen by over 20% in the last 5 years. In London, for example, so right, here you go. I love a cost fact, as we know from prior.
A bit like our Coke fact from our other episode.
The standard monthly travel pass for zones 1 to 2 costs around £165.50. In contrast, in cities like Manchester, a monthly travel pass is approximately £92. So, already there's that difference. But I think the thing is the rise in transport costs, that 20% rise, is more than people's salaries have gone up, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But, as I sort of said at the start, I have no issue with paying some, percentage more for an improved service, but the service is not improving. It's archaic. You're pricing people out of locations. I mean, what's really interesting about this data is, going from Manchester to London. So let's say we're looking at people coming into London. So the cost of travelling return from Manchester to London is £320. It's cheaper to fly into London from a European country.
Yes.
I mean, there's been articles in the Telegraph only last week. That is madness.
Yeah.
How can we justify this? And there's so many conversations about levelling up. As far as I'm seeing, what we're creating now is you can only work in London if you live on the fringes and can afford to get in. And that is a huge impact on the diversity of our workforce and thought. And we're not levelling anything up. What we're doing is making that north-south divide even bigger.
Yeah. And that article was interesting in the Telegraph, actually. I think that.
Did you read that?
Yeah.
What was it? The young lady lived where?
She lived in Spain.
Right.
And I think she'd kind of pre-bought her flights.
Yeah.
I think there was sort of 30 or £40 return. So she was, had to be in the office 2 days a week. So she was doing that commute.
Okay. And going back on the data piece, there is, significant difference in salaries as well. So we know, the north-south divide, people are paid depending on, the average living costs in those areas. So the north-south divide, taking that into consideration. So the average disposable income in London is around 38,700, and this is data taken in the last year and a half.
Gosh.
Compared to 28,500 in the northeast. So with transport costs eating into people's incomes, it is making it much harder for northerners to access job opportunities. And let's be honest, the better job opportunities for all of us are in the major cities. If it's too expensive for you to travel there, how do you grow yourself? How do you earn more? How do you develop your career? It's a blocker that shouldn't be there.
And I think exactly. I mean, if this disparity creates that barrier to mobility, it's going to affect companies buying in talent as well. To your point around actually, opportunities being in the major cities, for example, hybrid working as well, policies changing. So I think that, as well as that leads to that workplace diversity issue. So the lack of inclusion, lack of diversity in the workplace. So there are so many implications of these barriers.
And talking about that disparity, it's not about the individual cost. It's not about that £70 cost to me or whoever. It's more about the economic issues as well. So we've got the employee issues about that diversity of thought and talent, but it's the economic issue that the Northern Powerhouse indicates an aim to grow the North. But without transport costs being reasonable, how they can successfully do that?
Oh, no.
We've got HS2. I don't know if that's even carrying on. It might be, it might not be. Sections have been removed. But we're investing all this money to make it more efficient for people to go north-south, north-south. I'm hoping that improves things, but that seems to be way off. But what's the intermediate solution then?
Yeah. Well, HS2 is taking a very long time, and they're going under my house, which I wish they would like. I can hear this buzzing noise.
It might be done when I'm retired, so it'd be quite good to jump on that when I go for a monthly trip to Manchester. But yes, it's that's a whole new topic.
I mean, if we think about studies and facts, and studies have shown that improved transport links can increase economic output. So the Institute for Public Policy Research reported that by investing in transport, the UK could potentially add £13 billion to the economy.
Wow.
Right. But I think, yes, investing. And I think, but there's that whole piece, and going back to what you were saying at the beginning, yes, the cost of travel, fine. If it hikes, it is what it is. There needs to be that level of reliability, internet connection, etc. Trains, there's a leaf on the track, train's not running, I've got to get to the office. There has to be that balance there as well.
And I think going back, slightly off topic, if the only way in the current climate with a lack of investment that I cannot see it improving quickly, for employers to keep that balance of diversity of thought is reconsider, the remote working. That's got to be on the table, because through my networks and through conversations that we're both having, we are seeing a lot of people quitting working in London or in the big cities because they just cannot afford to do that. Yeah. And what people have failed to realise, I think, throughout all of this is during COVID, post-COVID and the flexibility a lot of employers that have given their employees, where inflation has increased and the costs of living have increased, that travel allowance people are using to support the day-to-day. So childcare, transport costs to and from school, etc. So that money's been absorbed because of inflation by the day-to-day, the ability to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And now with the hike in transport costs and how they are going to continue to increase, as you said, since the Chancellor's conversations recently and the lovely budget, how are people going to afford to come in? Because as I said at the beginning, I'm very much stretched or prepared to spend that much money in commuting. You will lose the talent. You will have that north-south divide where everyone in the office looks the same, dresses the same. Is that what we want to go back to?
Companies are going to face that challenge, right? That diversity challenge is, it's there already, it's happening, and it's going to happen more so as we come into the new year.
One of the things that I wanted to explore and try and understand is, why is our train network so poor? So what are the reasons it's got so dilapidated, really? It is embarrassing. So I was looking into the top reasons why our train service is embarrassing. That's all I can say. It is embarrassing. I mean, friends of mine that come in from Germany and France for the first time are shocked. So let's talk through some of them. So I think one of the major issues is privatisation and the allowing of foreign ownership of our networks. We all know that, the railway lines are owned by one company, the trains are run by multiple, the train stations are run by someone else. So that accountability piece isn't there. But also going back to the foreign ownership, we've got, since privatisation back in the early 90s, and many of the train operating companies are owned by foreign firms now, which I didn't realise until I looked into the research. And what this has meant, as with any commercial organisation, they're making the profits in the UK, and that profit is going out. It's not being reinvested to improve the tracks. Why would they? There's no legislation making them do that. So they're making money on British soil and taking the profits out and not reinvesting it. So that's one of the major reasons. Profit maximisation and investment, again, along the same lines. These companies, rightly so, are there to make profits. And if they're not forced to reinvest, why would they? And they are making record profits at the expense of the British population.
And that's only going to continue.
It is.
Right? It's going to continue.
It's only going to get worse. And the lack of coordination, as I mentioned earlier, that every part is owned by a different organisation. So there's no sole accountability. The trains aren't working. Actually, it's not my fault. It's not my train company.
Yeah.
The track's not working. Actually, we don't own the tracks. So there's no central accountability for that. And I know governments historically have toyed with the idea of bringing it under public ownership again. And that is a costly investment. But I cannot see, how else we can fix this or stop foreign companies buying and buy them back somehow. So there were the three key highlights of the reason why. And there are more, Catherine. What other ones are there?
There are more, and these are sort of ones that really stood out to me. So the regulatory framework being one. And the regulatory framework governing the rail network may not always incentivise companies, right?
What, to improve?
Yes. So
that's madness,
to
right?
invest in improvements. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, who are you speaking with? Because that's, investing in improvements. And we've already said, got to invest
red tape,
in transport.
yes.
Red tape, exactly.
Lots of red tape, unfortunately.
So it's the whole, if operators are not accountable for performance and reliability, there may be less motivation to actually enhance some of the services. So I don't know that. For me, I think when we're talking about kind of investing, we need to invest in the transport system. That feels really contradictory to that. Another one, which I think kind of links into some of what you've said previously and what we've discussed actually when we were commuting here today, is government investment.
Yes.
So while private companies operate the services, the government remains responsible for the infrastructure investment. Okay, so insufficient public funding for maintenance and upgrades can exasperate the challenges faced by train operators, and that was one that kind of really stood out to me when we were looking through the facts earlier. And then again, going back to what you said at the beginning, the long-term contracts.
Right.
So these are like the franchises that train companies operate under. Often, these are long-term contracts.
Right.
So they limit flexibility, change. If there are changes in demands, when we've got these longer term contracts, it's actually more complex to get anything done or make those changes and make those necessary improvements as well. So talk about kind of those improvements in the actual network system. So they were some of the ones that really stood out to me, and I think they all interconnect, to be honest.
It's interesting, isn't it? And so I think the summary from that is we're tied ourselves up in so much red tape that we can't, and it has to have a government focus to try and change that, which clearly needs to happen sooner rather than later.
It does.
Okay.
So look, let's talk about comparing the costs with those of Europe.
Yes.
Okay. Shifting our focus to Europe, in countries like Germany and France, they often subsidise the cost of commuting for public. So, and it makes it a lot cheaper for the residents. So, for instance, if I go back to my facts, a monthly pass in Berlin costs around €84. Now, that's approximately £72, and that's significantly lower than London. But I think they have those subsidising processes in place to support.
And have you ever been, I mean, as I said, a couple of my friends from sort of Germany and France, have mentioned it, but have you ever been to Paris or
Yeah, so
they are amazing. They are phenomenal.
2 floors as well. Do you ever get a 2-floor train? You always get and like, I think the cost, and I might be wrong now because it's been a while since I went to Berlin, but I did go with my husband and my daughter for a city break last year. It was like €1 from the airport into Alexanderplatz. So, wow. I mean...
And I imagine the same as Germany and France, and the trains I've been on, they're very clean, they're efficient, they're on time. Why have we ended up, I mean, we know because we've just discussed, in such a situation? I mean, that doesn't justify how our transport network is like that of a third world country. No. I mean, I'm embarrassed by our train systems in the UK. And I think the European friends that I have are embarrassed for me. Really interesting on costs. So in Paris, they have a monthly, I think it's called a Navigo pass or something along the line. Yeah. So that's travelling around. That's a monthly pass, and that's only £72.
Oh, gosh.
£72.
You could go anywhere.
Absolutely. Wow. In the area. Unlimited, no peak, no off peak. And they run on time. They really do run on time. And in Spain and cities like Madrid, they offer similar passes that are around €54, which is about £46. And again, the affordability, where living standards and the cost of living are substantially less in Spain. But what that provides people to do is have access to decent jobs that pay decent salaries in locations. I mean, comparing those figures to what we pay.
Yeah.
I
think it's what you find in a lot of European countries. The government does invest heavily in public transport, and that not only keeps the prices low for the residents, but actually it makes them more reliable as well. There's that whole level of investment piece again that's really important.
And I think going off piece slightly, what frustrates me about this even more is, the striking and the demands for greater salary that our railway systems and train drivers and operators ask for. That frustrates me that we're asking for more money for a dilapidated service that never runs on time. And, you know, in the private sector, you'd never dream of asking for a pay rise when you weren't delivering against your KPIs. But that's a different subject.
That's another podcast.
That is another podcast. That's the Bina and KB Rant podcast.
I think that is like after hours.
Grumpy old women.
I like that.
Okay, so the benefits of the systems that they have in Europe are very, very clear. I mean, lower transport costs means that employees are able to spend less money commuting, spend more money in society, have access to, you know, greater jobs and not clawing so much into their income. And it does translate for a working population that is a lot more diverse, a lot more working parents, mothers having access and not having to look at the transport cost of getting to versus childcare, weighing that up, is it worth me even working? And that's the difference I think we have in Europe, which the data shows is quite dramatic, actually.
I mean, if you think about reports, so other reports, other facts, right? A report from the European Commission states that countries with lower transport costs generally experience higher employment rates, and that doesn't surprise me, because obviously it just reflects on what you were saying there. And I know in Germany, for example, public transport is a priority. The employment rate is significantly higher than in the UK.
And why wouldn't it be? You know, that makes complete sense. You know, you're Dave, you live in the middle of nowhere. The job opportunities to you locally are to work, and no disrespect to anyone that works in any of these sectors, but, you know, you are, let's say, a qualified tech graduate, and the only jobs available to you locally are in retail that are not matching your skill sets. The opportunities are in London or another city. Absolutely. If your costs of travelling, you know, are minute or subsidised, you're going to be happier. You're going to get a job that you want to do. Yeah. You're not doing a job that you don't want to do because you can't afford to travel into a location to do the job. So yes, retention, happier employees, more productivity, all of the great things that stem from that. That doesn't surprise me at all.
And you're going to be thinking about your career. Yeah. So career enhancing, rather than, gosh, I have to do this. Yeah. So again, to your point again, I'd really like to look at situation over the last 5 years. So has it worsened or not? I
mean, I can tell you, yes, transport is getting worse every day. Every day, the quality, you know, the amount of trains that get cancelled, especially at peak time. When people are, you know, and that's adding to the stress of getting to work on time. You get to the station early, you wait there, trains delayed one after the other or completely cancelled. Yeah. You know.
And on that note, actually, don't want to go too off piece, but as, you know, if you're a working parent or a carer or, you know, whatever, you have to be back by, I don't know, 6:30.
Absolutely.
You know,
the nurseries closed or the schools closed.
Schools closed, childminder, etc. And you panic. Yes. You go into that panic mode and it's like, oh my gosh, so you have to rely on, you know, Joe next door or whatever, and that's not fair that's not fair for your own mental well-being or the well-being of the person that you're looking after. So that's another real that grates me about the reliability. You're right. I think it has deteriorated over the last 5 years. The campaign for better transport highlighted that bus fares, we're talking about bus fares as well, these have increased by 12% since 2018 in many northern cities.
Just northern, that's interesting.
Just talking about northern as well. So again, I suppose that's that north, we talked about the disparity previously.
What's really interesting, again, obviously, you know, the budget being an interesting topic, I think it's been announced that the subsidised buses that we've had, they're all going as well, which is a huge, huge blow to the working population. I think where I live, I was amazed. There was a bus going into Oxford at £2 each way. the economic benefits of the climate, of people not driving into those cities, and for people working. It's making it impossible for people to work and maintain a standard of living without just taking the job around the corner that they don't like and is not going to progress them, just because they can't afford it. And what's really interesting actually is that since the pandemic, it's been a bit of a double-edged sword actually, that many people have lost their jobs during that period. There's been a lot of uncertainty, as we've seen. There's organisations that have overhired and post-pandemic have retracted. So there's lots of movements in the job market. But during that time, the costs have increased, even though with less people using the trains, right? Because there is less people using the trains, or there has been up until now, where a lot of people have worked remotely. The train operators have increased their costs during that period. And as I alluded to earlier, people have lost their jobs, they're trying to get jobs, but the increasing cost of, travel is putting a huge financial strain. Do I go for the job around the corner that has no career progression, that is paying me £10,000 less than I know I'm worth, and offers no career progression? It's going to make me quite depressed and demotivated. For my sanity and picking the kids up from school on time, because I know that the train services don't work, or going into, let's say, London, but weighing the costs up and the strain of everything, it's not worth the travel. So the costs have gone up significantly since COVID. I'm not entirely sure why, because less people are using the trains. Again, it's probably down to the points we've discussed about profits and profit margins, but that is adding significant financial strain. Food on the table or that high-flying career, and that's what it's coming down to.
Do you think, I don't want to go off-piece too much, but do you think it's a way of getting companies out into more of the regions, out into some of the smaller cities, towns?
So redistributing. I all I can do is look at comparing us to Europe. And when I look at the comparison to Europe, the data and the stats just show what we're doing right now doesn't work. And the push to the regions is all good and well, but that's a bigger long-term focus, I think. The ownership of our railway system really needs to be looked at. If foreign companies are going to, own them, there needs to be policy to make sure there's reinvestment of a certain percentage back in. But there's a big, as you said, there's a big accountability and support that needs to come from the government.
Yes. Absolutely.
In forms of subsidies or something, or this nation's going to grind to a halt. I genuinely think that. And, my networks, the networks I have and we both have, a lot of the people I'm talking to are in the, top 5% of earners. And even they are having conversations around the cost of transport. A friend of mine owns a very successful marketing company in Manchester. And I was having a conversation with him recently, and he'd just won a new client in London. And the client wanted him to come down and meet with them. Looked at the train cost. The train cost was around £350 return the next day. And he was like, right, I'm going to come. Trying to win a new client. The meeting was for at 10 o'clock. Train's cancelled.
Oh, my gosh.
How are we supposed to grow small businesses?
Yeah.
If the infrastructure isn't there. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 delays. We all know this is happening daily. And in any other sector, if you was an organisation selling that service, you'd be out of business. But it's impacting the growth of our small businesses, our entrepreneurs. And we are seeing, a lot of entrepreneurs moving to Europe.
Yeah.
And that is related, some of it, to the transport costs, the various other costs that are going on in the UK right now. But we are going to lose talent in more ways than one if we don't do something about this now.
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of the other alternative, which again we've touched on in this episode, is around remote working.
Yes.
Options.
Yes.
To really mitigate the risk of, not only, thinking about diversity in work, but also companies bringing in remote working options. Really
I think they have to.
Flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely have to, Catherine, because I can't see, even if there is investment, anything changing overnight. This isn't a problem right now. There's multiple campaigns I've seen online of people trying to lobby to get this looked at, urgently. But I think the immediate action, you're completely right, for employers is to look at their remote working policies and allow that flexibility when the cost is extortionate. As employers, we need to think outside of the box to support our people.
Agree. Yeah, massively. 100% agree. And I think companies do need to reconsider options such as that.
Okay. Conclusion, we need better Wi-Fi. We need nice, clean trains. We need them to run on time. And we're not asking for the world because Europe seems to be able to do it.
Yeah. I think the cost of transport in the UK, especially between the north and the south, poses significant challenge.
Absolutely.
For us, for employees. We talk about employees, we're employees, but also employers.
Yes.
We talked about talent before.
Yes.
This is going to affect talent, the talent retention, and also buy-in of talent.
I also think on the talent piece, and I think we've approached this in other episodes, is the workforce is shrinking. There's no doubt, the data's there. We've got a much smaller birth rate. The working population that out there is smaller. So you are competing in a smaller and smaller talent pool. Mm-hmm. Restricting this further with not having access to the right talent can only cause more harm than good to the economy and employers generally.
Yeah, 100%. Again, would love to hear.
Would love people's views on this. Hopefully people are as passionate as we are about transport. It is a huge frustration for a lot of us, and we'd love to hear from you. The costs, how much you're paying to travel, how much has that increased? What other costs are you having to cut back on just to get to work? We'd love to hear from you. And anything else you'd like us to explore around transport would be great. But this has been great.
It has been great. Thank you very much for tuning in to
Thank you.
the dilemma of transport and how it's affecting, that north-south disparity, but also Europe as well. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I've been Catherine Bell.
Been Bina Hale.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, as Bina said before, on the episode, and any thoughts you have on future episodes, any topics you'd like us to discuss. But until next time, stay safe.